Hey, what is up, guys? This is Luke with Luke F1 Fantasy, back at you with another video, and this is recorded right after the British Grand Prix. So, what a race we had! It had a little bit of everything. The rain certainly giving us multiple storylines to talk about this week as we wrap up the race week. A lot of obviously we're going into a bit of a 3-week break here now with the Belgian Grand Prix not until the last weekend in July. So we've got plenty of time to mull over our team decisions, to chop and change our team selections. But here's a video to help you prep along for that. So once again, we're going to start off the video with a recap of radio message of the week, and well, we can't really go too much further without already talking about the main man of the moment, Nico Hulkenberg. The radio message between him and his race engineer right afterwards was, if you're a racing fan, a true racing fan, you can't knock this story. You cannot be anything more than ecstatically happy for Nico Hulkenberg getting his first podium in a 15-year career. So absolutely amazing job to Nico Hulkenberg. But as we know, this is my team that I went into the British Grand Prix with. They took a -10 transfer, took 3 to sort of get back into a bit more of a template-y sort of build, with the main priority of the week being getting Gabri Bortoleto into the team for what should have been a almost guaranteed price rise. But here we go. He didn't receive that this week, having unfortunately getting caught out in the rain and suffering a DNF and -20 to our fantasy teams, and with that a 0.2 million loss. But not only that, I was hoping to get Ferrari into the team because they were just lining up the timesheets in free practice 1, 2, and 3 to a certain degree. So it was definitely a needing to have Ferrari, not wanting to sort of lose out on their points. And choosing to go with Ollie Behrman also into my team turned out to be the actual right decision over an Esteban Ocon. So some good, some bad. Didn't quite get me the advantage that I wanted to, having committed to taking another -10 transfer. So a little bit on the downside for that, but nevertheless, for my global rank, it has raised me back a couple hundred spots. I'm now back into the top 1K at 820. I got a better budget from this team than a team that I would have run previously. So I ended up getting 2.5 million increase. The team I wanted to run was the triple McLaren with the Aston build, which I had run at the Austrian Grand Prix, which didn't turn out to be the right choice then when Aston were lighting up the time charts. But apparently this week, when they weren't lighting up the time charts, this was the week to have them. So they was a week too early on that type of team. But nevertheless, I think the difference in the both teams, I've got it up on the screen here. The difference between the teams that I wanted to go with and the one that I did end up going with was about 30 odd points, I think it is here. But would have only got 2.1 million in budget gain. So, paid 30 points to gain an extra 0.4 million. Maybe not the best decision. Probably wouldn't have taken that prior to the week, but we take the extra budget. That hopefully should pay off a little bit later on. So we'll see if we can get some of those points back eventually. But yeah, we have a sprint coming up in Belgium, so looking ahead to that. Again, it is going to be a sprint weekend as well, our third one of the year. So just to recap, obviously we have free practice 1, and then quickly followed by the sprint quali after that. So no free practice 2, sprint quali takes basically that session, and then we have the sprint, which is the short race on the Saturday. So extra points available this week. So remember that sprint weekend's always a lot of fun. Like tips for the sprint races, we've got more sessions, so more points opportunities. Now, we've got points scored in the sprint qualifying, sorry, the sprint race, the sprint quali, and the race. I remember in the sprint, we get points for the top 8 only with 1 point increments. So instead of it being sort of 25 for a win and 18 for a second place, we're going with 10 points for a win, 9 points for a second, 8 points for third, and so on, all the way to 8th spot. And then fastest lap points are available in the sprint, but only at 5 points as opposed to the 10 points that are regularly in the race. Now, if you remember from many conversations that we had earlier in the season, talking about limitless, talking about delta, etc., etc. So one thing to keep in mind is that on sprint race weekends, our B tier and our sort of backfield drivers, they are there to reduce the delta to limitless teams on sprints. So they're going to score a little bit more points. They're going to sort of raise the floor of fantasy point scoring on that week. So that also might give us a clue as to sort of how we might want to structure our teams going into a sprint weekend. And sprint's always a good time to play chips like your 3x, DRS, or autopilot when there are a few more points available than on a regular weekend. And as we start moving towards builds with sort of triples or quad A's, we're starting to certainly start to think about these into our strategies. And we've got to remember we've got 4 sprint races, including this one. So we always want to be utilizing some sort of chip on these weekends to sort of maximize our points potential. So for some of us who have sort of used like limitless and are negative, maybe sitting with 3 or 4 chips left, we're certainly not starting to think about when we're going to be using those. Now, one of the benefits of a sprint weekend is that we have the sprint qualifying taking place before our team lock-ins actually happen. So we get a good look at the grid for the sprint race, and we can help use we can use those results to help inform our team selection. But bearing in mind, we haven't really at this point of the weekend, we've only really seen a free practice 1 and a sprint qualifying. So very much the theme around sprint weekends is you got to get up to speed really quick. Qualifying pace, like the ability to put in like single hot laps and just nail them error free. These type of drivers are typically going to do a little bit better on sprint weekends because the weekend is kind of geared towards that. You kind of think even after the sprint race itself, it's a get out the car, quick turnaround, and qualifying actually happens on that day as well, where you've got to go out and just stick hot lap after hot lap. So certainly drivers, as we look to pick them, I'm going to be looking for those that typically, are very good at acclimatizing themselves to racetracks. So drivers that have a bit more experience. Also looking at teams who generally tend to like turn up to the weekend quite on it to begin with. Like, we see other teams that sort of start off the weekend slow and then sort of ramp up as the experience and the laps and the reps around that track and the data that they collect increases. So certainly some things to think about there. You're thinking about your also guys that have the ability to get into Q3 because that's going to certainly help sort of inform our choices this weekend. Now, we don't want to go too exotic with our team picks because ultimately we still have to try and find a balance between what is the constructor value versus driver value. And this is where we talk about premium constructors, your Mercedes, your Red Bulls, your Ferraris. Your premium constructors, your Red Bulls, your Ferraris, your Mercedes, they're going to offer you more stability over sprint weekends where there are multiple sessions. With drivers, there's always that kind of like pigeonholes ourselves a little bit. A driver could easily just get struck with a little bit of bad luck, get hit by someone from behind, pick up a puncture, have a slow pit stop, something that just is just out of their control and just hit some traffic. Drivers, when we're placing a lot of money on our drivers, there's just still a lot will happen. So constructor value, having a good premium second constructor is still going to give us some sort of floor and some sort of ability. And one thing to also to remember about with sprint races as well is that typically what we can see in them is because it's a very short race, is a 100-kilometer race, it turns out to be about 20, somewhere between 20 and 30 laps, depending on the track. sometimes that might not be enough time for the backfield markers to be breaking that 1 second barrier to a driver behind them. So you can kind of commonly get these sort of DRS trains where everyone's kind of following each other. It's the same speed. So again, in those situations, I might be looking for drivers that are typically, just a bit, they've got some overtake skills about them. So not just those that rely on maybe like the DRS and a more powerful car to maybe get those overtakes, because that's the type of overtake that might be nullified. But perhaps looking at drivers who maybe get their overtakes through braking zones. So that's what I wanted to share. Just some of the differences that I look at when I am maybe looking at drivers that I'm going to be wanting to put into my sprint race team for the weekend. But as we know, some of our decisions, or most of our decisions, are quite heavily influenced by the score, the budget algorithm this year. And so, while all that being said and done, we still have to take a look at the budget builder for the week to really see where the probabilities lie for our team members this week. And as predicted last week in my last video, I was predicting that once Norris got rid of that Canada DNF from his score and had a good performance in UK, he'll be back into our buy list for a driver that not only can score his points and can win the race, but now is back into the vicinity of being able to see his price increase as well. So he's seen 3 minus 0.1 decreases in a row. And so, this is, barring another DNF, he should most likely definitely see a plus 0.1 increase with only needing 11 points. But the 38 points is just about, he hasn't got them yet in the last couple of races, but add the sprint session into this weekend, and that likely puts him over that 0.3. So Lando Norris coming off a good bit of form here, 2 wins in a row. Got some wind in his sails now. So look out for Lando to be making a storm up these championship boards. Or look out for Lando, I suppose. So look out for Lando. This MPS3 again topping the charts. This is still model of consistency. Again, needing only 16 points for a 0.3, which is well within his reach. So again, the McLaren boys are kind of going backwards and forth. Aside from a little safety car error, PS3 could have easily taken this race and extended his lead in the World Drivers' Championship, and would have secured again more points than Lando by a larger gap if he had secured the win as well. So the rest of these A tiers, Hamilton, Russell, Leclerc, they're definitely even on a sprint weekend. I still would think that those are, at least the 0.1s, they're slightly in their reach. Maybe more Hamilton and Russell as opposed to Leclerc. But yeah, maybe some differentials in some teams that are going for a little bit more of a gamble over a sprint weekend, which maybe not a bad play. Okay, so looking into our B tiers, so not as tantalizing as it was at Silverstone this past weekend. Not as much bright green at the top of this budget builder list anymore. But Hulkenberg still leading the way at 20 points in Austria, 48 points in the UK. Needing minus 37 above that to see 0.6. So well and truly a firm hold in your team, a very, very strong buy if you've still missed out on the train of Nico Hulkenberg. I don't know if 48 points is always in his, if he's always going to get that, but we said that last week when he got 20 points, and we didn't think that 20 points he was going to get every week. So, we still think every week that passes by, we think that Kick have reached their peak, and then all of a sudden they take another step. So, they're just doing good things. And Lance Stroll, his points are good. It's great for Lance Stroll, 28 points, double-digit overtakes, error-free on a tricky track conditions, and especially for someone like we talked about Stroll with that wrist injury, how it's that feeling in his hands and his fingertips that is a primary role of the hands and how they connect with the wheel and how you as a driver respond. So, mightily. Although we kind of faded at the end there, I still think that's a great result for Stroll. Just driving in the wet, it's just going to take a little bit more of a feathery touch. I think that's a good sign of where he's feeling with his wrists and his driving. So, yeah, I think you have to give Stroll some credit for the performance that he put in this week. I would say Aston absolutely nailed the strategy for Lance Stroll, and certainly put him on the soft tires just at the right time. He got most of his overtakes in that moment, which is kind of ironic because I think he was the only guy that had new softs. Probably the only person that used softs on a wet weekend, but he basically has a new set of softs because he didn't do well in qualifying. So it is interesting that some of these tire situations, guys that don't, drivers that don't qualify well and they get left with these new tires, that ultimately they can still take advantage of them in the race itself. But anyway, I've talked a lot about Lance Stroll, so he may be in your thoughts. We'll come to these a little bit later on. Ollie Behrman's putting next on the list, -3 for 0.6. So he's already in my team, so he's looking like a good hold for me. Alonso slipping down this list a little bit with a single-digit performance that's underneath his sort of value. So still on a sprint weekend, again, we talked about B-tier drivers, strong B-tier drivers. The points floor should be a little bit higher for them on sprint weekends. 1 point for 0.2, 6 for 0.6. So very doable. Same for Esteban Ocon, another veteran driver, has got a lot of experience. -2 for 0.2, 6 for 0.6. So very much should be on people's radars as well. And then we have Pierre Gasly sort of sneaking in here. I guess his 0.6 is sort of slightly turning to red, you could say, but there's probably a little bit of green, probably a majority of green still in that shading, and 1 point for a 0.2. So, again, we have to, I think those are our sort of 6 main B tiers that I think a majority of our teams will be made up with, and there'll be some different combinations of this, which will be quite interesting to see based on people's budgets and what they do in other aspects of their team. But I think our at-risk guys, or guys that we should be selling, bearing in mind it's not going to cost us too much in penalties, but everyone from Bortoleto downwards, I would say, is a strong sell. Apart from, you'd say, maybe Lawson and Colapinto, although they may also be at risk for not scoring many points. They are at their floor of 4.5 million. So for those of you sort of looking to build into those 4A builds and need to get some cheaper assets into there, then those would be your prime candidates for that. But just know that they've got a long way to go to see any price increases just yet. So there'll be long holds if you decide to have them, seeing as they all scored DNFs this weekend and are carrying -20s for another couple races. So likely the best advice would be to move off them. But we will get into team selections probably later on. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the 6 B-tier transfer targets that we're going to be looking at for this week. And I wanted to just take a little bit more of a deeper dive into their scoring. What I wanted to mention too is with these stats, this is just taken from the last 4 races. So everything from Spain when we had the new technical directive come in. So I just wanted to kind of give a bit more recency bias just based on the cars are kind of in their newer shapes than they were since the beginning of the season. There's obviously been a few upgrades. And so we're starting to probably see teams bring less and less upgrades. So we're kind of getting to that point where the cars are going to be the cars. There's maybe some tweaks, there may be some track-specific wings or diffusers or brake cooling ducts that they may put on a car-to-car. But really, from an upgrades perspective, we're going to start to see less and less of those now. So I kind of took the stats mainly from the last 4 races because of that reason. And from that, what we can see from an overtakes perspective, Hulkenberg leading the way at 8.5, with Gasly at the other end of the scale at 3. From a qualifying perspective, we have Alonso, who has qualified in the top 10 in the last 4 races, so he's got an average of 9. Well, we have Alonso who's averaging a qualifying in the last 4 races in the top 10 at 9. Whereas we have, Hulkenberg, Ocon, Stroll, by this metric, not even making it out of Q1. And Gasly and Behrman showing good pace and sort of qualifying, sort of high teens. But from a race perspective, we really see how Hulkenberg really turns that around. So, from a typical starting spot of about 17, he's been finishing the race in 6th spot. So that ties into why he's getting loads of overtakes. It's tied into why he's getting lots of points gained. And obviously that translates very well, nicely into fantasy points per race. So averaging 28.8 race. So Hulkenberg, we can kind of say largely, his performance is due to qualifying a little bit lower, but then just showing excellent racecraft and race pace in order to, and being error-free to get his points. And as we see, his ownership is up at 91%. Alonso, we have a little bit more of a different story. We have Alonso who's doing okay in the overtakes, is 6.8, but he's qualifying sort of quite high, like he's getting a top 10 spot. So he is able, though, with his racecraft and his ability to defend and just his wisely old ways, but he's actually able to finish in a position around about the same way as qualifying. So he's kind of showing us that what he's doing is qualifying is what he can perform in the race. So he's kind of becoming quite an accurate predictor from where he's going to finish. It just depends on how he gets there. He's not really getting the points gained. He's not really getting the overtake. So he's just kind of like staying still, not really having too much of an exciting race. And so largely his points are kind of coming from his ability to finish in the top 10. So, on tracks that are a bit more low overtake, Alonso's really sort of coming to the fruition on those, as long as he can hook up his qualifying. Behrman and Ocon, I'll kind of talk about them together because the Haas has kind of been very similar performances through the season. Now, this graph doesn't show as much, but they are qualifying sort of bottom 10 and making up a few spaces. And again, very much a team that seems to get their points based on qualifying a little bit lower than where their true race pace is, and then they're able to show it a little bit more in the race. They had a trouble, be error-free. They seem to be doing perfectly fine on pit stops, on strategy calls. They don't seem to be taking too many risks. So just a good, solid all-round team. And now they brought one of their biggest upgrade packages to Silverstone, and kind of got a little bit to see a little bit of that this weekend. So we'll have to look forward to seeing what they do in Belgium. Then we have Stroll and Gasly at the bottom here. So again, both of these guys not really getting too much in the way of overtakes. Only 5 for Stroll, 3 for Gasly. We have qualifying kind of where we think they are. Like Stroll's not really been doing too much on a hot lap basis this year. Gasly sometimes does show up for free practice 1 and free practice 2, but seems to fall away quite quickly after that. But has been quite decent of late, having a sort of average qualifying position of 12th. And then from a race perspective, we've both seen them increasing their quality to race pace. So again, kind of showing us perhaps they don't have the car, perhaps they don't have the ability to get the most performance out of the car on one lap. But from a race perspective, they seem to be sort of, again, being error-free, staying close to people, being error-free, taking the opportunities when they come. But interestingly enough, looking at their percentage, they've got 0.2 and 2.8. So if we were looking for a differential, even though we're not seeing too much in the ways of how they get their points being, the more fruitful ones with being like qualifying a little bit lower, using a pace to come through. This kind of looks to me like a situation where do you avoid, does the move to a Behrman or an Ocon, if you didn't have them, is that one going to be a similar story to Bortoleto this week, in whereby the majority of people may be moving here, but maybe the move is to not move here, even though the budget builder says we should move here, but maybe there is some role for Stroll and Gasly to consider our teams, not only because they're the way they have an ability to get is the 0.6, but maybe from avoiding a DNF or a points perspective, maybe this will be next week's Bortoleto decision. So, all right, looking into team selections then. So this is my team going into the Belgian Grand Prix with 2 transfers to play around with. And 4 chips available: Final Fix, Autopilot, 3X, and Wildcard. So looking at the team, so the most at risk at this moment in time would be Gabby Bortoleto. Pretty happy with keeping Piastri. Pretty happy with keeping Behrman, Alonso, and Hulkenberg. McLaren have no real reason to move those out. Ferrari, yeah, had a bit of an off weekend after all, but things are looking good. Sort of have to give some weight to the weather conditions, the tricky conditions. Ferrari tried something different with Charles at the start, trying to put him on slicks right away. In hindsight, that probably wasn't the best decision, and yeah, just really couldn't get anything going from there. So Ferrari don't have to be a must leave team, especially when we look at the budget builder and Mercedes having a more of a difficult time to getting a max price increase. So really, it'll be tough to kind of move down to a Mercedes or a Red Bull, just purely from a budget perspective. So kind of maybe forced to work with Ferrari, but if that was the case and they're showing good pace, then kind of leaves me with 10 million in the bank, and from here, that kind of opens up basically anyone from the B tiers that I'm really interested in, which would be Esteban, Lance Stroll, Gasly, and as such. So I do feel like Esteban Ocon, again, is one of the most owned in the Patreon 500. Sort of have him at, he's at 38.6%. We have Ollie Behrman at 67.4% in the Patreon 500. So, so there is some, I think there was still a lot of teams that sort of even ran this past week, right? So, for teams that ran this, they could be looking at not even making any transfers at all and just rolling the entire team over. So I do see more teams sort of like different, deviating more to this sort of like double Haas, double McLaren, and sort of team makeup here. Can't see too many people moving back to Mercedes or Red Bull based on the scores. And so when I look at differentials from here, like we spoke about on the last screen, like maybe the temptation is to not go into an Ocon, even though I can afford it. And maybe there is some consideration for looking at a Lance Stroll, looking at a Gasly. I still want someone that's going to increase me in budget. I'm not going to go too wild with it, I don't think. The one that I could give some merit to could be a Liam Lawson. Okay, he's not going to get me budget. He's not going to lose me budget. But again, we've seen that this year that V-Carb does actually drive really well. It's an easy car to drive over the course of a sprint weekend. And I imagine Liam Lawson's going to do something. But he seems to just find himself in trouble a lot of the time. So he may not be my most fun pick to go with, but I don't mind the idea that he's at a 4.5 million. He's costing the less. If we start to sort of get teams again closer towards 4As, things like that, eventually we're going to have to have these guys in. And so, I might give some consideration for Liam Lawson. Let's see, can I final fix into Lando if I need to? So it's not a bad option. If the play was to try and final fix into Lando Norris, if I was thinking about playing a chip. So that might be a consideration. But the more budget-friendly option would be to kind of go with the Oscar, or the budget-building friendly option would kind of go with an Oscar, and then that kind of leaves, Esteban, Stroll, or Gasly to choose from. So maybe something like that. Maybe something like a Gasly build will just give me a slight differential. And it's tough to really trust the Alpine just with the bad vibes that they have, but it is one of those plays that you never know. You never know. It might work. Now the other option that I would talk about, and that it kind of comes with if I'm wanting to play the chip, And this really comes down to, again, if we feel like McLaren are going to run away with the weekend and that 1-2 is available, then the triple McLaren with kick build will be available to me this week. This would be the team. This would basically be the only team that I can get into in order to run the 3x, 2x this week or next race on a sprint weekend, which doesn't look too bad. Like now, I kind of feel a little bit better running this build than I did last week because we had Lando still on that price fall of 0.1, and so it was kind of giving you that little bit of an ick that the budget decrease would be a reason to take Norris out. But now that we've kind of got that Canada DNF off, I do think that the triple McLaren team this weekend is actually looking a lot more juicier now for sure. This will likely be the last video I do before the Belgian Grand Prix. I am putting it out early. I will be away actually the week of the Belgian Grand Prix. I'm going to go be out on a golf trip, so I may get like a quick video up in the middle of the week just to kind of give some little thoughts, just to recap some of the thoughts of this video, maybe put it more into a shortened, condensed version for that week. But yeah, then I'll be sort of on vacation, like heading out to Kelowna, to BC, kind of into like the lake country here in Canada. So the video after that in prep for the Hungary Grand Prix I'll be on location with a totally different background. I'll probably get some of the lake and the mountains in there. So look forward to that. Otherwise, again, as we're kind of approaching this middle part of the season, guys, I just wanted to thank everyone for your support. Appreciate the subscribes. It's been a cracking fun of time. I really enjoy doing these videos, really enjoy interacting with people. And yeah, if you're liking what you see, would love for you to help me get my subscriber numbers up. It definitely helps to build the channel. I don't really have much of a goal. I think I'm close to 500 now. So maybe if we can get to 500 before the end of July, at the end of the next race, that would be fantastic.